In the United States, folks, there have been protests gathered outside of the Florida state capitol for the passing of the Republican-led legislature of a bill that seeks to limit discussion on sexual orientation and that watchword of the moment, folks, gender identity. In Florida's classrooms, one quite vocal criticism came from the likes of President Joe Biden, denouncing the bill as hateful. Another watchword of the moment. The bill will make its way to the desk of the state's Republican governor, and somehow someone actually that is really important as far as the national conversation is concerned, and someone that's touted as being a potential nominee for the Republican ticket for the White House, Ron DeSantis. Now, the governor's defense of the bill, in which he says that the bill doesn't even have the word gay in it. You know, guys, really read the damn bill, maybe. Well, just have a watch of that and see what he had to say.
Asking on parental rights and education, what critics call the Don't Say Gay bill, is on the Senate floor.
Does it say that in the bill?
I know that you support.
Does it say that in the bill?
I'm
asking you to tell me what's in the bill, because you are pushing false narratives. It doesn't matter what critics say.
Hold on, it says it bans classroom instruction on sexual identity and gender orientation.
For who? For grades pre-K through 3. So 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. And the idea that you wouldn't be honest about that and tell people what it actually
So you'd be like, well, fair enough, right? This is a governor who's actually saying, well, if you read the bill, we're talking about children here. But my guest today, I'm absolutely delighted to say, is Arielle Scarcella, somebody that I've been following on social media for quite a while now, actually. And you're quite the cool cat, Arielle. A YouTube content creator. You've been on quite the journey, though, haven't you? Moving from the left to a more conservative position. But is this bill making you, as a gay woman, is this making you froth with rage for the children of Florida?
It's not, and I'm in Florida right now. I live here part-time. It's not. Like, I had my friend Brooke actually call me up 2 days ago, and she was like, did you see all this outrage? All of it's fake outrage, because she works with the Republican Party of Florida. She's also a lesbian. And she's like, these people don't even read the bill. And they're walking around, the Democrats now, I think it was a Senate Democrats account on Twitter of Florida, walking around saying the word gay, 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 gay. Like that, first of all, like, that's not even, the word gay isn't even in the bill. I've read it. What this bill is strictly talking about sexual orientation and gender identity for pre-K through 3rd graders, which, to be honest, I'm all for. I don't think that kids that are 5 years old, 10 years old even, believe it or not, need to know about gender identity.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, no, go ahead.
The Democrats are arguing that the bill's language, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that the bill's language was too vague and that the threat of legal action might frighten teachers into steering clear of the issue. Say a gay child comes up to you and says, well, Arielle, you know, I think I might be gay myself. And a teacher then says, well, I can't actually answer that question because I'm too afraid to. Do you worry about that sort of the chilling effect of speech and discussion in the classroom?
I do think the bill can be interpreted as vague, but that's only because it's a few pages long, right? Like, how specific can you get? You'd have to have hour-long conversations of what you think is okay versus what's not okay in the classroom. I think what the bill, more importantly, was discussing is that teachers can't initiate these conversations, right? It's not like they can have a full classroom lesson plan, right?
Yeah,
labeling all these different, right, in the curriculum, labeling all these different identities. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I'm glad to say it on your channel. If you are LGBT, like in the truest form, right? Like, you're actually same-sex attracted, or you're a transgender person who has gender dysphoria, you don't need a teacher to explain that to you. Like, you just know that you're different. Every single gay person or trans person that I know has known that we were different from the age, around that age, from age 4 to 9. Like, we've known that we're different. We don't need to be told that. We just need to know that we're safe and that we're accepted, but we don't need to be taught all these different new genders of the week.
I'm noticing a trend here.
Kids way more. Yeah.
I think you're right. I totally agree with you. And I think I'm noticing a trend that where there's basically the gays of the old guard, I would describe them, not to try and paint you as being old, Arielle. I would never
I'm
dream
older,
of
yeah.
doing such a thing. That believe in the sort of laudable aims of the original Stonewall equality agenda, right? That
Yes.
that gay men and women should be able to be accepted by society in law and of course in wider life, and be free to live lives just as boring and dull as heterosexual people. Right?
Correct.
They were the aims that I
And-
grew up with.
Yeah. And Dave Chappelle actually said that in one of his live comedy shows. I think it was on Netflix. He talked about how he even relates more to the Stonewall N-words, as he called them, and how they're the actual bad asses, and how this new generation he doesn't understand. And I don't either, to be honest. I think there's a big generation gap. And I've noticed that because I've been making content on YouTube for the past 12 years. So I've noticed that shift starting to happen around 2015, I would say. But the youth will continue to label the people that got them their rights. You know, they will continue to argue with us, call us transphobic, us bigoted, even though we were the ones that got them.
Yeah,
the
I
place
mean,
that
in
they're
this
in.
country, controversially, I know there will be some conservatives who just vehemently disagree with me on this, and that's absolutely fine. But one thing that I was really, when I was still at school, actually, they were talking about debates around same-sex marriage. Now, that came into law in 2012, I believe, if my memory serves.
Yep.
And then we're still hearing, right? At that point, I thought, that's it, equality, right? This is equality for gay men and women.
Right.
And yet now, is this just a case of, is it a bit like sort of St. George in retirement? St. George has slayed the dragon in the fable, and
But now he's bored and
swinging
wants
his
everything
sword.
else.
Exactly.
Yeah, he wants something else to do. Yeah,
Is
I
this
do think
it?
that's
Is that
a big
what
part
it
of it.
is?
I do think that's a big part of it. I think that a lot of these organizations, like Human Rights Campaign and Trevor Project, will probably always be around because it's suicide prevention for kids. But a lot of these rights organizations wouldn't exist if they didn't have something new to fight for, right? So they have to come up with these new ideas. And also, I think it really has become purely political at this point. I think they're using this as ammunition against conservatives and Republicans, or even moderate libertarians like myself, you know? And if you go against the agenda in any way, you're bigoted, you're a racist, you're a Nazi, you're trans, all the buzzwords, of course. And I think that's what they're tending to do at the moment.
Yeah, accuse you of being any ism or phobia that they can
Whatever
think of
they
under
can.
the sun. Yeah. And I'm sorry, but I think fundamentally, going back to your original point there, I don't want, whether it be American children or British children, to actually go to school learning about all of these fancy new gender identities and sexualities and what over maths and English, right? Because you've got to,
Right.
if you're talking about these issues, you've got to then talk less about, or not at all, about other things. Surely the priority should be ensuring that kids leaving school with the ability to read and write and be, accepted in the workplace. Never mind
Exactly.
some new trendy gender identity.
Right, especially since they're changing weekly, right? Or hourly for
exactly.
some of these supposed people. None of it makes any sense. I think that it's the slippery slope argument coming to reality. And I think it's hurting us in the long run. I really do. And I think that's why you'll see the older generation of gays and trans people like Buck Angel speak out against this nonsense.
What gets me is that it's not only, our kids listening to the likes of Greta Thunberg, for example. And you must have seen the stats that show that, kids are experiencing nightmares and anxiety over,
Right.
that teenage truant, Greta Thunberg, and her acolytes basically terrifying them into believing that the world's going to
world's
burst
gonna end
into a
tomorrow.
ball of flames. Exactly.
Right,
or
right.
we're
That
going to
was us
drown to death.
during the year 2000, right? All the computers were going to mess up. Everything was going to... No, nothing happened.
I mean, I remember being shown The Day After Tomorrow. You remember that film? And Al
Yep,
Gore,
with
of
Jake
course,
Gyllenhaal,
waxing
yeah.
lyrical on all these things.
Yeah.
But we now have kids, right, who are going to school absolutely terrified of that issue. Now they're potentially learning about there being infinite genders, or that you're able to pick them out like you would a pair of shoes, or a blend of sexual orientations, when, as you rightly say, I personally believe that that's something you've got to conclude yourself, right? You've got to come to your own, in your own way, at your own time.
100%. 100%.
But
Like, I
are
knew
we-
at 9 years old And
Exactly.
we weren't like, I am for same-sex sex education,
Yeah, so
right? And like,
sex and relationship
right,
education, basically.
of
Yeah,
course, yeah, 100%. But maybe it's my own bias showing, but I didn't learn that type of stuff until I was 11. That's when they taught us in New York City public schools sex education, right? And I think that is a prime age for it because it's a little bit before puberty, so people aren't going to be like going crazy over it. But it's also taking into account that a lot of young women get their periods around that time. So they have to know more about their bodies, right? I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think talking about all these gender identities that has no scientific basis whatsoever is ridiculous.
because in
Teaching
some
7-year-olds.
American schools, for example, and I'm just going to put it on screen, this gender bread. It's not a gingerbread; it's a gender bread.
Right.
And
This is what they're showing kids.
This is what they're showing kids, and this gender bread is supposed to teach kids about this gender identity topic and about issues around sex and gender. Now, to me,
Right.
the fact that they're using a gingerbread man or indeed woman, whatever you want to call it,
It's a non-binary.
it's a non-binary gingerbread. I'm cancelled now, Arielle. I'm cancelled. That's it. I'm done. The fact that they're
Genderless.
using gingerbread here would suggest that they are focusing on kids who are under the age of 11. You know, if we sort of think about our
Right.
cutoff point as being about that age of 11, before puberty, as you rightly say,
Right.
is it really right that we're basically giving this stuff out to children and saying, you know, come learn about this trendy new thing we want to talk to you about today?
Well, I think that here's the truth of the matter. Kids can inherently, most of the time at least, know when somebody else is of a different sex without looking at their genitalia, right? People can usually tell this unless somebody is that, far along in their transition, then, they're actually one sex but present as another. That's very rare though, right? The attraction thing is another thing that I don't think we need to speak to kids about at that young of an age.
Yeah.
I don't think kids understand sexual orientation at that young of an age. When I was 9 and 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I knew that I was different, but I wasn't like, I wanted to put a strap-on and go bang a girl. Like, that's not where your head is at that age. It's more of a romantic concept. You're like, oh, well, maybe I would like to hold this girl's hand. Like what you do, like if you were a straight little girl, like you would want to hold the boy's hand or go for a dance with him. So in that context, I think it's fine to talk to kids about, like, let's say if somebody has 2 moms, oh yeah, sometimes girls love girls and they get married. That's it. That's all you need to say. And you need to, and then you can say also something like, and you need to respect them and they love their children just as much as a mom and a dad. But that's it. Expression. How rare is it for someone that's going to be 4 or 5 years old to express their gender differently than a typical boy or girl? It's very rare. And if that comes into play, then you say, listen, he's a boy. He likes to wear girls' clothes sometimes. That's okay. You can be a girl and like to wear boys' clothes, girls' clothes, right? In quotes. It's not even really a thing. And I think that's where that needs to end. And if somebody's actually transgender, they're going to figure that out as time goes on anyway.
On
right?
that point, then,
like I said, we don't need lessons on that.
Yeah. I mean, on that point, one issue that I'm really keen to get your thoughts on, in this country, we're experiencing, when I left school in 2009, and you're talking hundreds of kids being referred to gender identity clinics in this country. We only have one that deals with children, especially. It's a National Health Service clinic, and it's quite controversial, Arielle, actually, because there have been a massive number of kids, a massive spike in the number of kids being referred to this particular clinic. And the BBC, actually, so our state broadcaster, put together a expose, or you might want to call it, on this particular clinic. And there were girls being recommended to this clinic. And it is mostly girls, by the way. This is a phenomenon that we're seeing more and more.
I've done videos on this and the culture behind that and why it's happening. Yeah.
Loads of videos on this particular topic.
Yeah, very important.
But that's what I want to ask you, actually. Why is it that you think that there are girls who, and in fact, parents that say, I would prefer a trans outcome over a gay outcome, and therefore I'm putting my child up and referring them to this clinic? We see that sort of practice in the state of Iran, not in the West. What's going on here?
It's literally conversion therapy. It's new age conversion therapy. I don't think that new age conversion therapy is what's happening in the West. it might be happening in places like the Middle East, right? Like they'd rather just have rather somebody have a sex change and be straight. What I think, I think the reason that we're seeing this happen most often in young women or young girls, young teenage girls, is because thinking that they're trans, right, or non-binary or genderqueer, whatever these words are, thinking that they have gender dysphoria, is because gender dysphoria is very likely to be mistaken. It's very likely to thought that that's the issue instead of somebody being diagnosed with possibly depression or sexual trauma, which is very common in young women, like more common. It's disgusting how common it is. Anxiety, OCD, all these mental illnesses could be body dysmorphia. You know, young women are also the most likely to suffer from eating disorders, right? And mental health issues, like I said. So I think majority of the time, these young women think that they have gender dysphoria and they think that they're trans. It's actually other issues under the surface.
And what gets me is that
they
these
need different
kids,
treatments.
yeah, these kids are being told that because you're experiencing it, it could be the kids might be autistic and they're not able to perhaps, you know, make friends and relationships as well as other kids at that school. But the what they're being sold, in my opinion, is a false promise. They're being told that the solution to your problems, whether that be any one of the list that you've just put across there, the solution to your problem is to change. It's your sex. Your sex is the issue. Who you fundamentally are biologically is a problem, is the problem. And gender identity, once you've transitioned, once you've gone on generally irreversible hormone treatments, once you've gone on the puberty blockers, you're going to be fine. You're going to be really happy. And we're going to see in the not too distant future, we're seeing it already. Keira Bell, you've covered the Keira Bell case as well.
Yes.
We've seen from the cases like Keira's that
we're seeing the case of detransitioners rise. And again, 95% of them are young women, people that are born female. And I think a lot of it also has to do with misogyny and sexism in the world. Unfortunately, and I say that as a non-leftist, I don't overuse the word misogyny and sexism, right? I think this is a very legitimate case of it. And I think that there's a lot of young women who don't want to be women. And I don't think that they think that they're actual trans men. I think they just don't like the idea of being a woman. And I think that's the much deeper issue that we need to talk about.
That's really sad.
Yeah, it is sad. Yeah. Well, look at how they treat women in media that disagree with people compared to men. Look how they treat J.K. Rowling, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually,
I think
J.K. Rowling, I think that's a really important point because she's been in the press again. Yes, was it yesterday that was International Women's Day or the day before? 2 days ago.
Oh, yeah, whatever it was. Yes.
And
somebody was like, "Are you going to die on this hill?" And she's like, "Yes, I will."
Yeah, I am.
And we were
basically.
Like, Queen.
Yeah. I mean, she's seen a fair amount of pushback for that, and she's basically become she who must not be named to much of the sort of woke activist class. It's really sad to see. But what gets me is that, and it's funny that it's not funny at all, but it's, I think, pressing that you mentioned the misogyny point, because I see in J.K. Rowling's case, I see a woman that is saying, look, we need to ensure that single-sex spaces, access to sex-segregated spaces is sacrosanct. Because I, as a woman who has been through domestic violence in the past, which she has, she's written eloquently about this. I tell everyone that they should go read that blog. It's one of the most thoughtful things I've ever read in my life. And really, really, I think, quite emotional as well. And she's making this case as a woman and saying, look, we need to protect these things. And yet the left-wing activist class turn around and, again, going back to your point earlier, they call her every ism and phobia under the sun for arguing for single-sex spaces for women who've been through domestic violence to be protected. Just what the fudging hell is going on here?
Which is kind of bizarre if you really think about it, because the reason they're arguing for trans women to be allowed in women's spaces is because they know that men can be violent and that men could be, more ridiculous towards trans people or towards females than females are. So, in a weird way, they're arguing for the same point, but then getting angry at us for proving that point. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's not about trans women, right? It's really not. It's about having sex segregated spaces, and it's about knowing why spaces are gender specific or sex specific in the first place, right? Is it a safety issue? Is it just simply a social issue? If it's a social issue, it doesn't matter. You know, I've had friends of mine that are trans women, completely physically or to the best of their ability, whatever, physically, socially transition. And they were in my friend's bridal showers as a trans woman. Is that a safety issue? No, it's a social thing. Let them do whatever the hell they want. If it's a safety issue, then I have an issue. Well, unintended, then I have an issue with it. Then I'm gonna talk about it in videos.
Yeah. And for that, you've received quite a lot of backlash yourself, right? Have you lost
my
friends
God.
over this?
I've lost over like 100 friends, like
Wow.
100 influencer friends. I hate that word, but hundreds. I've lost brand deals. I lost my management company, all for speaking out against this stuff, and also just for simply coming out as a Trump supporter, and just coming out as a non-leftist, I guess, because I don't think I'm conservative. I think I'm a classic libertarian, moderate, who leans conservative on certain issues, right?
I mean, and
But
that
leaning conservative these days is, I just think, the same stance, to be honest.
yeah, being conservative these days is probably trying to bring about a dose of liberalism again, isn't it?
Yeah.
Liberalism in the European sense, not the American sense.
Right.
In the classical
sense
liberal sense, in the tradition of the Constitution, basically, right?
Yes,
In the going back to basics.
Yes.
But on that point, on Trump, do you want Trump to stand again? Because DeSantis is speaking your language, isn't he? He's common sense through and through.
I think it would be cool for both of them to run. I don't know who would pull out as the first pick. I think both of them have a strong base, but unfortunately, I think Trump's base is stronger. And I think Florida would miss DeSantis if he wasn't the governor. And I think it's important to have him in a swing state,
Yeah.
in a purple. Yeah. I think it's important to have him here.
What about him as
And
VP?
I also think he's young. I think he's 45. He's so young. He doesn't need to run right now. He could run in a few years and it'll be better for us.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
Which, by the way, we in Britain are like, that's young. I mean, the idea of putting up an 80-year-old for president for prime minister rather, would just be so bizarre.
No, they're completely out of touch. He's completely out of touch, and I didn't vote for him. I don't know
never
anyone
mind
that did.
Gender identity. That man doesn't know what he had for breakfast this morning, does he?
No, he has no idea. He walks around with a mask on outside alone, and then when he's inside, he talks to people close to his face.
It's really creepy. So
my
odd.
God, it's bizarre.
So
None
odd.
of it makes any sense.
Now, I wonder if to end then, Arielle, you might sort of reflect on where you see this all going, because if you were, I certainly wouldn't want to be younger today. I'm 28. I wouldn't want to be any younger. I wouldn't want to be at school in this day and age. Because I think as far as speech and debate's concerned, I think the parameters of what you can and can't say are getting narrower and narrower. I think the exploration of ideas is far different from what it was when even the days of MySpace. I mean, those happy halcyon days, right?
Right.
Where do you see this actually going? Because you've released a video defending the bill, the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill, even though it actually doesn't say gay. Where do you see America and actually, I guess, the broader West going on all this stuff? Do you think actually there's gonna be a greater pushback to it, or do you think buckle up, baby, because we're in for one hell of a ride?
I think both. I think that the far left is becoming increasingly more obnoxious and annoying and outspoken, but at the same time, I think conservatives, and I say that meaning somebody like myself who is not on the far left anymore, I think it's pushing us to be more outspoken as well. So I don't think that they're going to get as many bills or laws passed through as people would think, because I think that they've pushed so far that they've really upset people. And I think the pendulum is not that it's starting. I think it's already like going towards the other way. Like if you talk to younger people these days, and I mean like 15 to 18-year-olds, a lot of them are more conservative leaning, more like in the classic liberal kind of context, right? Kind of sense. Whereas it's like the 18 to 30-year-olds are the ones that are like crazy, crazy far left. So I think the new generation is being shown none of this stuff that none of it makes sense. And they're like, okay, I don't want to be a part of that, because it's happening in front of their faces, right? It's at their schools with the masks, and at their schools with the kids going in different bathrooms and all these things, and trans women in sports, and none of them, Biden not making any sense, spending, what is it, $14 billion on protecting the Ukrainian border, but not giving a crap about our own. Like, kids are waking up. This new generation is waking up because they are seeing it unfold. Whereas I think Gen Z, or just like the kids that are a little bit younger than I am, a little younger than you are, it was more that they were told certain things would happen. So they were indoctrinated at an earlier age. And now they realize they're being lied to, but they're still not comfortable leaving.
Do you think there's also an element of the fact that for such a long time we've been quite decadent in the West, because, on both sides of the pond, frankly, in Britain and America, we've been so used to the fact that there's no war, there's nothing near us anyway. Now, of course, in Europe, we're seeing that Russia are saying, well, if you economically, sanction us, then we're going to threaten you with nuclear Armageddon.
Right.
And you sort of think, well, does that not shift priorities? Does that not make perhaps the next generation start to think there are more important things?
So. I think that's a really, really good, important point that a lot of people aren't bringing up at the moment. Yeah, no, I think so. I think, of course, when it comes down to it, we go back to our basic needs, right? Are pronouns part of our basic needs? No.
All part of the bloody curriculum, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's like, okay, what is actually needed? Food, water, safety, love, a
rights, protections, all of these things.
Right. The right to live your life the way you want to live it, as far as as long as it doesn't, impede on anyone else's rights. And the moment you start to see those types of things go away, I think, like you said, people's priorities shift. And I think it's, if we're going to see the silver lining in any of this, that's what it is.
Exactly. I think I'm there as well.
Twice.
Yeah. And I hope we're right on that, by the way.
I think COVID did that as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
People stopped fighting for a little bit, and everyone came together again. And then COVID ended, and people didn't believe it in anymore, and they started fighting about masks again.
If not,
didn't last that long, but
if we've got this all horribly wrong, then I think you and I are going to have a lot of fun in the gulag.
Oh yeah, for sure.
If there's some kind of global World Economic Forum, I don't know, gulag, then we'll be in there together.
Yeah. And we'll both be in hell, because apparently we're terrible.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's hell too. Yeah, we'll have a lot of fun there. It's warm. Yeah. I can get a tan.
Yeah, same.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Reasoned is a grassroots organisation that's entirely funded by people like yourself. So if you're in a position to do so, please do consider supporting us by clicking the link to the side there.